Hi, this is Josh Silverstone with Aces Rays, recording live from Las Vegas, Nevada. I am here at the Flamingo Hotel. Before we get started and get into everything, I'll give you a quick little tour of our view here. We're not on the strip side, unfortunately, but I will show you. We have a pretty decent little view off the back side of the hotel. It's kind of cool. You see, yeah. And that's it's called the High Roller. It's like a big Ferris wheel. Apparently, I think a dozen or so people can fit in each one of those like little compartments. It's lit up at nighttime. It's real cool. So, yeah, not too shabby over here. So I want to start with that. I'm here. I'm actually joining my wife, Jen, on her trip. She's here for a business conference. And my first piece of advice to all of you out there, if your significant other is going to go anywhere for work, tacking onto a trip to Las Vegas, not a bad place to go. So that's my first pro tip of the day. Otherwise, yeah, I guess so far we've had some good food. Went to a show last night, saw Terry Fator. If you don't know Terry Fator, he took over for Danny Gantz as the Variety Entertainer Act at the Mirage. He was actually the winner of America's Got Talent in 2007, I believe. And he was awesome. He's a ventriloquist. He sings. If you ever get out here, really, really cool show. That was a lot of fun. Also, I got to show you this. I thought this was so cool. So we found this artist on the street, and he was making these. This is actually done by spray paint. Spray paint and what kind of tool would you call that? Have you ever seen drywall or spackle for like spackling? Whatever you use to apply that was basically what he used to move the paint around. And it was just, it was incredible. We did this one. Obviously, this is Vegas. And then my wife is from New Jersey, who actually saw him he was in New York originally, like 7 years ago. Same guy. They were talking, kind of figured out that they'd actually, I guess, met before. And he also did a New York skyline that came out just as cool. So anyhow, that was pretty neat. I guess last thing I'll say before we kind of jump into things, you can see I'm wearing my Capitals gear today. Today is April 15th, Wednesday, April 15th, and it is the Capitals' first round of the playoffs, first game of the playoffs. So I am supporting them, of course. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I wanted to do this webinar here from Vegas just because if you're going to do some poker lessons, where a better place to record it than from the Las Vegas Strip. So, and also we're doing an event, which I'll talk about a little bit more later, on May 6th. Not in Vegas. That'll actually be in Rockville, Maryland at Huckleberry Fine Art. I'll show you some more details on that later. But I wanted to do this as a little bit of a primer for that. And then also just for anyone else who's sort of been curious about poker, but never really had individual attention or taken the time to learn. So this is for you guys. Yeah, let's kind of hop into it. So before you really get into some of the training, I just want to talk a little bit, I guess, about poker history and kind of how I got into it. I'll just give you a little bit of background, and then we'll really hop into things. So I grew up actually playing tournament chess. I was a really good chess player, and I think that sort of set the foundation for strategic thinking that got me into poker. So I played cards growing up, but it was really more probably 12, 15 years ago, kind of right before college, and really in college where I really got into learning the game, studying, reading, talking to people about hands, and really trying to, treat it like a professional, make the best possible decisions I could, and what that really looks like. And, I was always playing poker over the past decade or so, though it was really about a year and a half ago where I started Aces Rays and have been doing training, coaching, and events for that period of time. Although I've been playing over the past, I said, about decade, when I had a sales career, sales training and development, And now the two have kind of come to a head, and that's a little bit more what I'm getting into now with the type of work I'm doing, kind of bringing to the corporate world poker training that also applies to the business world. And we're doing some pretty cool things. But again, I'll get a little bit more into that a little bit later. A little more general on poker. Poker's been around a long time, started in, I think Europe, came over and, was in the South and the West. Everyone's seen Westerns where people are playing, like Wild Bill, Hitchcock, whatever, playing poker at the table. So we all know those stories. But really it kind of went more streamlined, I guess you'd say. I think it was in the 70s when the World Series of Poker first started. And again, when poker was first on TV, people love watching poker on TV now. That's one of the things, even people who don't really play the game or understand it, they do enjoy watching on television. But it wasn't always so fun to watch. Really, the big innovation that came to make poker a fun thing to follow and watch on TV was the introduction of whole cameras. So on the table, you can actually see players' cards, because before that, you were just kind of looking at their emotionless faces. So you're just sitting there staring. You could see their actions, but had no other idea what was going on. So when that was introduced, and you can actually see what players were holding, you can kind of follow along, and think, oh, what are you doing, or why are they doing that? And became a lot more fun to watch. So that was one of the big things that sort of added a spark to poker. The next thing was the introduction of online poker, which most of us probably know now is sort of on the downswing because of some U.S. regulations and some other things that I'm not going to get too much into today. But in the late 90s, that was really when online poker first got introduced, and a whole new wave of people really came into the game. And then probably the biggest thing of all happened in 2003 when a guy by the name of Chris Moneymaker, real name, qualified online on a $40 tournament for a $10,000 voucher to get into the World Series of Poker. And that was, I guess, a big thing for anybody. I mean, he was just, an accountant from, I think it was Tennessee, I believe. And he ended up, making it down to the final table and getting heads up against one of these old Las Vegas pros, Sammy Farha. And this Chris Moneymaker ends up winning the World Series of Poker and $2.5 million. So this guy who played in a $40 tournament online, got a voucher to play in the World Series of Poker, the most coveted poker event in the world, and ends up winning the thing. And that kind of sparked what's called the Moneymaker effect. And everybody sort of took the attitude, or a lot of people did, and said, oh, wow, people, they saw it and said, oh, that could now be me. Kind of the same idea with races, and nobody could break, I think it was the 3-minute mile, and then someone did, and then everyone else followed afterwards. Same sort of concept. Someone else did it, now they believe they can do it. And so that brought a whole new wave of people into the game, and the World Series of Poker grew exponentially year after year after year. And it's still, I think it's kind of peaked out now, but still a ton of people come every year. I played in the World Series of Poker this past year, and it was just, amazing experience. Even for amateurs, it's just a really, really cool thing to come and check out. So that's a little bit on kind of your poker history there. So let's get into, I want to talk a little bit more about some poker rules, some terminology, some basics to really make you feel comfortable playing in any game. So I'm going to share my screen here. So what we're looking at here is a positional chart. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of what's going on here and sort of the flow of the game of poker. So what you're looking at here are kind of the different seats around the table. So this is assuming these are all players, so 10 different players around the table. This right here is the dealer button, which represents the dealer position. and you have a small blind and a big blind. These are forced bets, and it's always in this order. Dealer button, the immediate left of the dealer button is small blind, and the immediate left of the small blind is the big blind. That's always the case. And these blinds are called blinds. They're forced bets. So kind of, if you're familiar with the term ante, they are essentially they're essentially antes. A little bit different because not every player has to post them, just these two seats. Okay, so you might be thinking, well, I don't want to sit in this seat, or I don't want to be this seat. I'd rather be here where I can see my cards, But what actually ends up happening is after each hand is dealt, the dealer button slides over one seat, and then this person becomes the small blind, and then this person becomes the big blind. So everybody is going to be the dealer, the small blind, the big blind, and every other seat the same amount of time. So it doesn't matter what seat you have around the table. It's just in that particular hand. So what's important to look at here, and we'll get a little bit into just positional strategy as we talk about the different seats and what they kind of represent. Up here, this seat is what's considered early position. This is all early position. And then you see kind of middle position here and late position here. And the reason that's relevant is because it's an advantage to be in the later seats. The dealer position, this is the best seat at the table. It's an advantage to be in these later seats because when you're in late position, you get to see what other people do before you have to act. As opposed to being up here, if you see your two cards, which we'll talk about starting hands in a second, but if you see your two cards and then say, and decide to go with it, you still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people and the blinds to act after you. So if you have let's just say a marginal hand, and we'll talk about what that means in a second, and let's just say you match the big blind, and then one of these player raises or someone raises and then re-raises, you're going to have to put more money in the pot with a hand that isn't very strong. Versus if everybody folds to you and you're here, well, when you're in later position, you see that everyone already folded out and you have only the blinds, which essentially are two random hands because they're only in there because they have to be in there. You can open up your range of hands that you can play, playing a little looser, and versus playing a little tighter, less hands up here under the gun and even in middle position. Again, and it does depend how many players are in the game and how many players exactly are acting after you, and also what type of player they are, which we'll get into as well. But all these other kind of factors come into play. But in general, it's pretty safe to say you want to play tighter up front, again, less hands, starting hands, and you can play a little looser here because you already have a lot more information because you get to see what other people do. Plus the fact that although we're talking really pre-flop here, pre-flop meaning before any community cards coming across the middle of the board, also after the flop, we are going to be acting after our opponents as well when we're in later position. They'll make a little bit more sense as we kind of go along. But a big part of the game is really figuring out and understanding the players that you're playing with. And that's what we call player types. So players are on two different spectrums. We talked a little bit about loose and tight. Again, loose means that they play a lot of different hands. And tight means they play fewer hands. And we'll scroll up here and I'll show you what I mean. This is your starting hands chart. So in Hold'em, you're dealt two cards face down. Those are called your whole cards or pocket cards. Okay, everyone gets two whole cards face down. And so if you're only playing the 5 very best hands, which are aces, kings, queens, jacks, and ace-kings suited of the same suit, then you're very, 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 very tight. Okay, that's too tight in a majority of situations. That said, if you're playing, all these hands from every position and then other hands that aren't even on here, like let's say like 8-6 offsuit, isn't even on this chart, that's below 7 tiers of starting hands, then you're playing very loose. So that you have to consider when you're trying to figure out what people are doing, what kind of cards they're holding. That's kind of your first bit of information to be able to make good decisions against them. Again, if they're playing very loose, then the quality of cards that you need to have the winning hand decrease, versus if they're playing a very, very tight range, then your cards on average are going to have to be better, because they're playing better quality cards. So you need to adjust in that way. The other spectrum, other than loose and tight, is what we call the passive and aggressive spectrum. So in Hold'em, you have different options on the betting rounds. Again, there's 4 rounds of betting in Hold'em. Pre-flop, that's when you only get to see these 2 cards. The flop, which we'll take a look at a couple of examples in a little bit, but that's 3 cards that come down face up on the table that everybody uses to make their best 5-card poker hand. And then the turn and the river. So that's the turn comes down, that's the 4th card, there's another round of betting, and then the river, another round of betting. So that's your 4 rounds: pre-flop, flop, turn, and river. And how people act or make decisions on those streets, that determines if they are more passive or more aggressive, or if they adjust their strategy, how they're playing their cards, not just the cards they're playing. So examples of passive play are checking and calling. Examples of aggressive play are betting and raising. So one of the first sort of keys that someone is more aggressive, and again, looking at the two, even if you're not a very experienced player, you should start being able to see, okay, I'm understanding that this person is definitely more aggressive or less aggressive than this person. And one of the big tip-offs to that is their pre-flop play. Whether they're just sort of limping in, which is limping in is just calling the big blind, that's fairly passive, versus someone who is raising pre-flop a lot, that's fairly aggressive. Also, if someone is re-raising, which we call 3-betting in poker, then that's also a very aggressive line. So we need to adjust our strategy accordingly, and also just take note, okay, this person's more aggressive, this person is more passive, and then how we're going to play them and act against them. It's really dependent, because everything in poker, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's all situational. So our position matters, the person we're up against matters, the cards we're holding, do matter to a degree, but there's a lot of other factors that sort of come into play with that. So in this particular case, you really want to kind of get familiar with this. This is actually all on our website, Aces Raise Resources Tools. I think it's actually the tab is called Poker Strategy Tools. And we have the hand rankings chart here, which hopefully you're familiar with, but we will take a look at this in a second briefly. But really, you want to juxtapose this to this, okay? Because as we talked about tight and loose, you want to play really a certain amount of tiers, probably tier 3 and better, from very early position. Like hands like Ace Jack and King Queen, although they're decent hands, again, they're kind of this 4th tier here. Again, and I'm talking sort of in general at a full ring game, under the gun, those hands aren't awesome, because with this many players to act behind you, if someone has a hand like, if you're holding, let's just say, King Queen, and someone has Ace King, you're in a dominated position. You're in pretty bad shape against that hand. The odds calculator here, and we'll take a look exactly what that means. So let's say you have King Queen offsuit, and someone else has Ace King suited. Okay, you are you have 23%, what we call equity in the hand, versus Ace King. They're going to win 75% of the time. So this is a pretty tough spot. This is a pretty tough spot. So the key, one of the best ways to be a winning player is to avoid situations like this where you are getting yourself into what we call dominated spots, dominated situations. So hands like king queen, it's not a bad hand per se, but again, it's all relative, right? So if everyone folds to you and you have king queen in these positions here, let's say, yeah, sure, that's probably worth a raise. Up here in early position with so many people to act behind you, there's probably a better spot and probably better hands that you can play. Take a little bit more of a look at this. So we're going to kind of move into kind of talks about hand rankings or starting hands in position, and I'll talk a little bit more about hand rankings and how that really applies with the actual board. Because although this is your let's move this down, these are your ranking of hands. These are true for really any game of poker, or most games of poker, I'll say. Full house, four of a kind, two pair, all of these are really generally the same. But what's important in Hold'em is that, and what that kind of makes it a little bit unique, is you get your two cards again. So these cards come face down. Okay. And everyone gets dealt a hand. And then these are the community cards that get dealt face up. Again, these first three cards are called the flop. This fourth card is called the turn. And this card is the river. So let's just pretend that we'll just make this a three-handed game just so we can kind of, sort of compare. In this case, you can see that they're all fairly even. Ace Queen has a little bit of an advantage just against three hands. But in this case, this player, they might raise or just limp in three-handed. This is a pretty strong hand. Although, again, on our chart, just to kind of show you how things are fairly situational, this is Ace Queen offsuit. So it is in the third tier. But again, we got to remember is we're not talking about a full ring game anymore. We're only against three players. So the value of hands like this go way up. It's still a pretty good hand even at a full ring game. But against even fewer players, it's a very, very good hand. So the pre-flop action could look like probably raise. This would probably be a re-raise. And this player, depending on the bet sizes, depending if it's a cash game or a tournament, which we'll talk about a little bit, how that affects our decision-making along with stack sizes and some other things. This player would raise and they might fold, but for the sake of argument and just to be able to look at some flops and see how textures change, we're just going to assume that all the players went and they saw the flop. We'll say it's a much more passive game than we're playing. Again, in general, an aggressive strategy in the right spots is a winning strategy more so than a passive strategy. We probably won't talk too much about why that is on this recording, but certainly in future open webinars, we're going to get a little bit more into then taking what we learned here and otherwise and applying that to building a solid winning poker strategy. In this case, let's put down a couple flop cards. Oops. It's the four of spades, queen of spades, nine of clubs. So what you really need to, this is one of the things I think most new players struggle with as they start to learn. One of the things that became very apparent as I started coaching people, they kind of knew the rankings of hands. They wasn't really sure what beats what exactly. But once you really know the ranking of hands, being able to look at your two starting cards and then look at the community cards and figure out, what your hand strength is, what strengths and weaknesses of your hand are there, what else is possible, what the nuts is. The nuts is the best possible hand. So I think we'll spend a little bit of time going over a couple of examples of this just to sort of show you how you start taking a look at the board and really dissecting and figuring out your hand strength. And this is what we call board reading and board textures. So in this particular case, Uh, this is a pair of queens with a top kicker. So basically, if someone else had king queen, you would have the winning hand, or at least be ahead of them at this point. Again, remember we still two more cards to come, but you would be in the lead because your ace plays. Again, we're playing queen queen nine ace four. Remember your best 5 card poker hand. Okay, so in this case, this person here, so 5 6, they have a flush draw. See that? So 2 spades, they got 2 spades in their hand. So there's 9 spades left in the deck. Okay, what I mean by that is, again, there's 13 total spades in the deck, and there's 9 spades that are left because 4 here are on board. No spades in players' hands. Not that they would necessarily know that, but we do. So these 9 spades, we call those outs. Okay, and the way it's getting to this 40%, okay, you take those outs, and outs are cards to come that give you the winning hand. And in this case, any spade would make a flush, and that would give this 5 6 the winning hand. So the way you kind of calculate, you see the computer's doing it for us and giving our percent chance of winning. You take the 9 outs, and each card to come, you multiply by 2.2%, or roughly 2%. So that's how you're getting to 40. So it's essentially 9 times 2.2, and then times 2, because you have 2 chances. So basically 20% chance, 20% chance twice. That's how you're getting to 40. Okay. Here's your Jack 10. So in this particular hand, they have 20% chance of winning. They have a open-ended straight draw. Okay. Queen, Jack, 10, 9, but a king or an 8 would give this hand the winner. However, the reason that they don't have as much equity in the hand is because it can't be a king of spades, or it can't be the 8 of spades, because that would give this player the flush. So those aren't their clean outs. So if a 8 of hearts came, that would be great. But if an 8 of spades came, that would be pretty much a disaster. And it might be tough for this player to get away from it, unless they know that this player with the action definitely only has a flush. So in this, you need to tread lightly when you are drawing to straights. Draws are great hands. Again, you can see like this player has top pair with an ace kicker, and they're up against a flush draw, and it's almost even equity. Okay, so but when you have a straight draw against a possible flush on board, you have to recognize that a lot of your outs aren't clean, and they put you in a bad situation. Again, the key, we want to stay away from bad situations. So in this particular hand, this player might bet out. If they call, or call, probably won't raise in this spot, probably just call long. And depending on the bet sizes and how much is in the pot, you really have to decide whether or not it's worth it. Essentially, are you getting pot odds to call even though you only have a 21% chance of winning? So basically, the pot needs to be giving you at least 4-1 odds to make this a break-even play. And again, I don't think we'll talk too much about pot odds and going all to the math today. It gets a little bit tricky, but what we're learning now about equity and odds, we're sort of setting the table and setting the foundation for how you'll go about making those decisions later. So let's put up another card. Throw up the Queen of Diamonds. So in this particular case, you can see that the Ace Queen became a lot stronger. At this point, now they're 70% favorite to win. 5 6 of spades, they still have some outs. You see it went down a little bit. It's not exactly 9 outs anymore. And actually, that's because that took away the 9 of spades. Because if the 9 of spades came, that would give this player a full house. You see queen, queen, 9, 9. So that would be 3 queens, 2 nines, which would be queens full. So even though if the 9 of spades came, I would give this player a flush. Full house always beats a flush. So, and then this person still has just 14% equity. So, again, if there's a lot of betting here, and I imagine this player is definitely betting out, and depending, a lot of players still will be calling in the spot trying to hit their flush. And again, depending on the size of the bet, it may be right or wrong. But against a paired board and a flush draw, this Jack 10 really shrinks, even though the equity is sort of similar-ish. Still not a very good situation. So on the end, I mean, just to kind of demonstrate the point. So ace queen makes queens full, and even though they made their flush, it is not at all good. Not at all good. So again, this is one of the things that I kind of recommend to get beginning players and even experienced players misread boards a lot. They just don't see all the possibilities, and I think that's a huge mistake. Because this is the easy stuff. I say quote unquote easy stuff. This is the information that is readily available to you if you're looking for the right thing. So really practice this. Take a deck of cards, deal random hands, deal random flops. Pay attention. Try to figure out what the nuts is on a particular board texture. See how the board can change given a different card coming out and how that changes the situation. And this is something that you can practice, and that way all your thought process and mental energy isn't going into just figuring out what you have and what's possible. They'll just become a little bit more second nature, and you can really focus on your opponents, what they're doing, and being able to make good decisions against them. Because again, it's your hand strength is not absolute. It's all relative. It's all a matter of, okay, the strength of your hand is only as good or as bad as your opponent's hand. And that comes back to quickly the reasons for betting in poker, which is you're either betting for value or you're betting as a bluff. And when you're betting for value, that means basically, will your opponent call you with a worse hand? So if you have the best hand but your opponent folds, you're not getting any value. So you need to be able to justify it as, okay, I'm going to bet and my opponent will call with worse hands. That is how you get value in poker. If they're not going to call you with a worse hand, then maybe checking is a better option, and that will induce them to bluff. A bluff being the second reason for betting, which is getting your opponent to fold a better hand. So really, to simplify it, is essentially, will my opponent call with worse value, or will my opponent fold better, bluff? And if it's not clear that either of those are the case, then checking is probably a better decision. Let them make a bet, and then you can adjust to them, and you basically allow them to make mistakes. So again, we're getting a little bit more technical in terms of strategy, but just again, these are all setting the foundation for things that we're going to build out a little bit later. So I think we're cover a lot of different things. This is a lot of information to get kind of all at once, but I want you to kind of get used to sort of the flow, how to sort of make decisions, what to look for when cards come, etc. The last thing I'll say before we wrap up for today is tournaments versus cash games. So I'm going to actually stop sharing the screen, and now you just have me. So cash games and tournaments play a little bit differently. There's a couple of differences. One, in tournaments in general, you buy in for whatever the set amount is, and once you're out, you're out. In cash games, you can rebuy up to the table max really at any point, so you can always add more to your stack. In tournaments, the blinds go up every whatever the period of time is. Could be 15 minutes, could be 30 minutes, could be an hour, depending on the structure of the tournament, whether it's a turbo, whether it's a deep stack tournament. And if they wanted to go quicker or last longer, those things all matter. But in cash games, the blinds stay the same. So the reason that's important is because your decisions are going to change over the course of a tournament. There's actually different phases to a tournament, where at certain points where losing chips is worse than gaining chips is good. So protecting your chip stack versus having to chip up and vice versa. There's different phases. Again, we won't go into the specifics, but just know this is a general idea. Tournaments are interesting because, versus a cash game. In a cash game, you can get up and walk away from the table with whatever you have in front of you at any point. In tournaments, you basically play, last man standing. Actually, 10% of the field gets paid in tournaments on average, but a lot of it, the payout is really in the first few places. That's really where all the money is. So you need to build up your chip stack to a degree, and you have to essentially find spots and find situations to get your money in to hopefully double up, triple up, and really build a stack so you can last to the end. So you have to look at it as when a tournament starts, it's kind of like buying a new car and driving it off the lot. Your car depreciates in value as soon as you drive off the lot. Well, as soon as the tournament starts, basically after the first hand, your chips are actually worth less than they were at the start of the tournament because somebody now has more chips. And that has to drive you to go after, and this is why we talk about playing an aggressive game. You have to attack chip stacks. You have to really find good situations to get in and I hate to use the word, but gamble in some spots, even if you're only a 60% favorite against a certain hand. You have to take those small edges because getting chips, especially earlier on, is really, really important. Now, once you get to, in tournaments, what's called the bubble, where their chips actually start to have a monetary value, because again, you can't just, if you have $10,000 in tournament chips, you can't cash those chips out and then just go out. Like they're not worth anything until the end. So the bubble is basically at the point where your chips now start to have a monetary value because there's cash outs. So in other words, if there are 1,000 players in a tournament and a top 100 pay, well, that 101 seat, that is the absolute bubble, because 101 doesn't make the money, but 100 does. Well, if you're sitting in that spot and making it into the money is something that's important to you, then you probably need to tighten up a little bit. Well, and the counter strategy to that, at least a lot of pros and experienced players, they don't care about min cashing because they know it's a lot of money is up front in the final table. So they know that people are then playing tight at that point because they want to min cash. So they start playing more aggressive and going after players and attacking stacks in order to chip up a bit. So you see, that's not exactly leveling, but you can see that when someone's doing this, someone else is doing this, and that's called basically exploitative strategy. So in general, an aggressive strategy works really well. Unless there's really, really aggressive players at your table, then playing a passive strategy at times can actually be a little bit more effective. So again, I think that's pretty good for today. I do want to share my screen one more time to show you. If you are from the Maryland area, DC, Virginia area, on May 6th, we are having an event, Networking Poker. This is going to be a fun night. We are having kind of open networking from 5:30 to 6:15. I'll be doing more training. We're going to go into depth on a couple more strategies, and really also poker strategies that then apply to the business world as well. So I like to say strategies that you can use to win on and off the table. You'll be able to ask some questions, and then we're going to play a poker tournament, just a fun tournament. So again, this is all for fun and educational purposes. So really hope you can come. The best way to find this link, go to bit.ly/networking poker event. Or you can just contact me, Josh at Aces Raise. I'm happy to send you all the information. So yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you for bearing with me. This is the first time I did a little live recording like this. So hopefully I'll just get better and better and be able to bring you more useful information and strategy in the future. But until next time, again, thanks again for sticking with me. Play well, run well, and until next time, I'll see you. Take care.